Our friend Heather MacDonald has a great piece over at City Journal, Girling the Boy Scouts. And it's not just about the demise of the Boy Scouts over the last several years, which we've documented here, discussed. It's also how the downward spiral of the Boy Scouts tracks with the larger downward spiral of American culture into this identitarian morass we find ourselves in which we find ourselves situated. The need for an entity that valorizes males or that merely acknowledges their existence is greater today than when the Boy Scouts was founded in the early 20th century. Those are the words of Heather MacDonald, part from her piece. And we're pleased to be joined by Heather MacDonald now to discuss this in greater detail. She is the Thomas W. Smith Fellow at the Manhattan Institute and author of When Race Trumps Merit, How the Pursuit of Equity Sacrifices Excellence, Destroys Beauty, and Threatens Lives. Heather, thanks for being with us. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Dan.
So we need an organization that valorizes men and manliness, that projects father figures in addition to the fathers that at least some boys have at home. And we don't see one in the offing. And frankly, the demise of the Boy Scouts sort of speaks to why, doesn't it?
Right. And we have many of those for females. That's what's so galling about this. When feminism came about, it was zero-sum. It purported to lift up females by tearing down males. The Girl Scouts still exist. Nobody is pressuring the Girl Scouts to change its name or admit boys. And yet the feminists who decided that they were going to destroy the Boy Scouts, rather than saying, well, we want to make the Girl Scouts, if we feel the Girl Scouts are inferior to the Boy Scouts, we'll bring the Girl Scouts up to Boy Scout standards. We'll have them offer Eagle badges, Eagle Scout status. Instead, they said, no, the way we're going to do this is just to destroy the Boy Scouts as currently existing. And that's typical of the identity world that you mentioned at the beginning, Dan, which is that the mob, which has turned itself onto the entirety of Western civilization, that's really what's going on in these pro-Hamas protests. They're anti-Semitic, but they are at core anti-Western. The mob cannot create, but it can tear down, and it is drunk on its power to destroy.
But the Girl Scouts will take boys pretending to be girls, just as the Boy Scouts will take, well, you don't even have to pretend because Boy Scouts is for girls and boys both. Now, scouting, boys gone. But of course, they're all fully committed to the gender identity politics of this, even at a young age.
Right. The Girl Scouts is, in fact, very left-wing. It began the identity stuff early on. But now, the Boy Scouts has its diversity, equity, inclusion director. If you want to make Eagle Scout status, you have to take a badge in diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's got affinity groups for gay employees, for Latinx employees, for Asian employees. Of course, it does not have an affinity group for white male heterosexual employees. It has diversity training for its employees. I mean, it really looks like a college gender studies program with maybe a little bit of camping thrown in, but I'm sure that too is now has to be inclusive of I don't know what of trees or animals or something.
Oh my God. So Heather MacDonald, can girls become Eagle Scouts?
Yes.
Okay, and that's been in place all along, or did they have to
fight
for that?
They had to fight for that. The Boy Scouts used to be an organization for boys. It was founded in the early 20th century by a British war hero who looked around in Victorian England and said, boy, we have a lot of sickly boys of doubtful morality here. They're shoplifting, they're smoking, heaven forbid. I want to create an institution that will teach them that the essence of manliness is goodness and chivalry, and will give them something to aspire to, because he thought that the boys he was seeing in Victorian England were not going to grow up to be valid and valorous and magnanimous men. Theodore Roosevelt at the time said, let's remember that the essence of manliness is orientation towards others. And that was the ethic of the Boy Scouts for a century, but it understood that boys have an important need to bond with other boys. They elevate themselves, they compete, they also beat each other up, but they create male bonds that are there for a lifetime, and that the Boy Scouts was a forum in which you could try out those male identities of selflessness, of altruism. And that became completely unacceptable. The first assault was in the 70s when they said, you're not relevant, and the Boy Scouts said, okay, we got to be relevant for ghetto boys, so we're going to throw aside woodcraft skills and do, how to solve rat bites and navigate subway systems. Well, finally, they course-corrected on that. They realized this is not the way to sell it. And I have been to inner-city Boy Scout troops that are things of beauty. To see these young inner-city kids without fathers in a church basement learning how to start a fire and pledging the flag and worrying about the neatness of their uniforms, that gives them something to live up to. Well, then the gay movement, the gay lobby took aim at the Scouts and said, you have to have openly gay Scoutmasters. Never mind that they were suffering a problem with gay Scout abuse by Scoutmasters, but no, that was something that was unrelated to having gay Scoutmasters, the child abuse problems. So then they opened it up to gay Scoutmasters, openly gays, trans came in, and then the females said, you're not inclusive enough for females, and since about 10 years ago, the core Boy Scout program was open to girls. The thing that happened recently that is just symbolically so significant is they decided, even though we're not even an all-boy program any longer, because that would not be inclusive, which is the 1990s, 200s version of relevance, we're going to get rid of the word boy in our title because that is itself offensive. And so it's no longer called the Boy Scouts of America. The organization has rebranded itself as Scouting America to get rid of any last vestige of maleness.
You make this important point, too, that the Scouts Executive Board, CEOs of red state companies that produce petroleum, pipelines, livestock, canned food, heavily male. I mean, I know Rex Tillerson, Rexon, the CEO of Exxon was I don't know if he still is, but he was chairman of the board recently.
Yep.
And yeah, so all these men of some accomplishment and some means who understand something about the real world and business and organizational ethos and mission focus and so forth, and yet they just all, I don't want to say got steamrolled, because they seem to have been willing participants in the Boy Scouts' demise.
They all caved. There is no resistance to the progressive steamroller in mainstream institutions. We'll see what happens with the election, but mainstream institutions are absolutely vulnerable. Nobody has the guts to stand up. I mean, for heaven's sakes, if the military and Marine commandments have allowed females into combat units, at least in the Army, then there is really no hope, because if ever you need male bonding for combat readiness, it's in a combat unit, and yet even there, the feminists have won over common sense and traditional values. And in many instances, of course, it's the wives. We see this with CEOs as well, that are pushed further and further left. And we know that females are the left-wing force in our culture today. And so, as I say, the wives of these CEOs cave. But again, yes, I was just surprised. I researched who these board members were, and you would have thought, those red states where some of them at least are standing up to the whole diversity, equity, and inclusion scam, would have some backbone, but they don't.
Yeah, it's really interesting too, because You just want. I mean, this is sort of everybody who's sensible on this wonders what is it going to take for some sort of
Yeah.
resetting or rebalancing. We watch an Algerian man beat up an Italian woman in an Olympic boxing match yesterday.
Angela Carini.
Right. I mean, but that's nothing new. That just happened on the Olympic stage, but it's nothing new. We've been seeing this for years in terms of men's incursion into women's sports amid all the identity politics. You talked about what's happening in the military. We're talking about DEI culture in the Secret Service that almost maybe cost the former president his life. DEI culture in the FBI that leads to abuses and illustrations of incompetence and so forth. These are agencies with massive law enforcement power, police power. And so, I mean, when you think about this, since you've done so much research and writing on the topic, do you have any sort of answer to the when is a rebalancing going to take place? When is there going to be a revolt against this? Is it underway with some of the clawing back of DEI policies? Or how do you assess the landscape and the prospect that it changes significantly?
Well, first, and I would add medicine to that.
Yeah.
We have in every medical school students who are being admitted on the basis of race who are not qualified. They are being passed along who are not qualified. We are lowering the standards for medical licensing in order to avoid disparate impact on less qualified black students. I'm just going to be very honest about that. The game is all about avoiding disparate impact on black students who do not have the academic skills that are traditionally required in a variety of professions. So it is everywhere. I know what is going to have to happen, which is people saying, you can't scare me with calling me a racist or calling me a sexist. I don't care. I'm going to do what I know is right, and you're not going to silence me. What that is going to take, I don't know. I mean, when are white males going to stand up and say, we are not the problem? We do not have anything to apologize for. I will apologize for Western civilization when I see Indian and Chinese and African civilization apologize for its genocides, for its imperialism, for its efforts to subjugate and colonialize, for its slavery. Not a single civilization has ever done better on average than Western civilization when it comes to human rights and spreading progress. But somebody's going to have to gain the courage to say that. And yes, there are signs of progress. The red states are being creative in how they cut back on this thing in universities. And I hope that they keep going. And it's amusing to read the Chronicle of Higher Education reporting on all of this and how dare they politicize education. We're so pure and all we care about is the pure pursuit of knowledge. We would never do anything political. And here are these right-wingers coming in and they are imposing that we study American history. Of course, it's okay that we impose studying that white people are bad, but we're not going to talk about that. So there is things happening, but it's not happening fast enough, frankly.
Heather MacDonald, Thomas W. Smith Fellow at the Manhattan Institute, author of When Race Trumps Merit, How the Pursuit of Equity Sacrifices Excellence, Destroys Beauty, and Threatens Lives. Heather, thank you as always.
Thanks, Dan and Amy.
Thank you. And she joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.